Раз, раз, два.
Окей. Начинаем, да? Good afternoon, or for some of you it's evening or morning. Anyway, we are very glad to see many our old friends, although not in person, but at least online. Okay, my name is Alexander Sokolov. I'm from the Institute for Statistical Studies and Economics of Knowledge at the High School of Economics, Moscow. And our session will be devoted to one of the most rapidly developing instruments of foresight studies, which is big data and artificial intelligence. And the fast development of artificial intelligence is one of the key trends during last years. And foresight is definitely using this instrument for its development. So we'll see several presentations in this sessions, which will show us examples of analysis and foresight using artificial intelligence and big data. We are actively using these instruments in our institute during the last several years. We're developing we've been developing our system, which we call IFORA, and you will see some example of its application a bit later. So this issue is of extreme interest for us, but I hope it will be interesting also for all our all people who are attending our event. So I will ask each of you to limit your presentation with 15 minutes in order to leave some time for discussion, for questions and answers. And also, please, I noticed that some of you did not did not show your name under your image. Please, rename it if possible. Okay, so our first speaker is Ilya Sechenkov from our institute. So, Ilya, the floor is yours, please.
Hello, dear colleagues. I will present my message in Russian. Так, мой экран видно?
Да,
Can you see the screen? I have shared it. Yes. Very good day, everyone, dear colleagues. My report will be about big full text data analytics. I'd like to look into some case studies and applications of the technology and the architecture of the systems that underlie the text analytics and mining for foresight purposes I represent. As Mr. Moderator has just said, the ISSEK, Institute of Statistical Studies and Knowledge Economy, and I'm Vice Director of the Center. I'd like to begin by showing the main challenges and goals in tech analytics and mining and info extraction that many STI actors face. In next slides, I will look into applications, but now it's going to be a brief review. The most recent case is the patent search. The most frequent case is the patent search. And it's about analyzing the current level of research to see at what level this or that technology is currently in. It's kind of explorative search task. A related task is the technology transfer facilitation in the Russian Federation. We currently don't have a well-developed toolkit to support technology transfer. And in order to know who in this country does this or that area or problem, or has the expertise in this or that issue, one should turn to the leading research entities like the Higher School of Economics and Moscow State University or Skoltech or academic institutes, just asking them, will you refer me to someone who would help me handle that or this issue or area? It's not too efficient mode because you may not be able to find the proper center or the proper person. While projecting and forecasting, you may also have problems because you are not always able to find the latest information on a topic. And last but not least is the selection of experts to review, for example, a grant application, or you may not find a proper reviewer for a scientific paper. And currently these problems are resolved on the community referral basis, because it's like kind of networking based approach, but unfortunately it's not always justified. This slide shows a more formal manifestation of what I have just said. There is a great deal of R&D actors that need this or that type of analytics to process scientific information. I will specify later on, telling what sources it is all about. But currently, let me say that, well, the mid column is the actors, tasks and goals. Most tools are international Western ones, and they are quite expensive. You should buy a subscription. And they do not always reflect the Russian language adequately. The databases, for example, Russian language databases, the patent databases, or the papers, scientific papers databases are not represented. There are some instruments like RINS and others, but we are anyway faced with an issue. If you do explorative search, you should turn to a dozen of databases and then be able to reconcile data manually. How these tasks have been resolved now, and how we can do analysis, for example, looking back at the past 10 years, the retrospective of the past 10 years. Different systems support different languages. You should be knowledgeable of these languages and type in a complex query, a complicated one, to be able to have the full grasp of the topics, and then you should analyze the results to see whether they have the authors have the intellectual property rights. And a similar tool would be kind of classifiers, but there is a host of them, a great deal of them, international ones, Russian ones, domestic, like the Russian Scientific Fund or Russian Fund for Basic Research. Reflects too broad a spectrum of papers. All that reflects too broad a spectrum of papers. And the use of different information sources definitely requires manual aggregation and data coordination. To learn who is an expert in this topic, you shouldn't only look at the papers and theses and patents, but you should be aware that a certain Mr. Sochenkov, the author of all the three papers, is one and the same person. And this is a problem. So what a solution may be, and the HSE is moving towards that, it is like establishing a digital platform that will aggregate full text data, I emphasize, because the full text analysis and mining helps do a lot of things and implement many of the things like the double funding, repeated funding, recurrent one. Well, the list of sources relevant for the Russian Federation is given in the slide. These are patent sources and those related with different organizations and institutions that have been supporting startups, and the databases for papers and theses. The key core services will be the full text exploratory search by given sample document, and the topically similar papers are identified and presented. And semantic search for natural language query with restrictions on metadata. Cross-language plagiarism detection, like a paper may be in one language and the results will pop up in a different language, and then come user-defined subsets of documents. You can select the relevant documents and cast aside the irrelevant ones. Well, additional functions also include generation of keywords and automatic generation and summarization and visualization and data export for analysis, for joint analysis with structured data. So our platform is meant not only to obtain final visualization, but to be able to jointly analyze data, structured data. This slide shows the potential, the capability that the platform enables. It is about the fact that apart from the info support and software support and program support, methodological guidelines are needed. You should know how to use all these functions. So if an analyst, for example, uses the functions in a sequence, he or she may easily find an answer who would be nominated as a grant beneficiary or the paper author, and what entity is the competence center in this or that domain, and other similar questions. Let's look briefly what the architecture may be and is. So it's the search engine by the nature with a set of advanced features. It's like a classical search engine with pre-selection of information from different sources and storage of information that is further on processed with the help of linguistic analysis and pre-indexed afterwards. All those things and features that may be necessary to the users should definitely be implemented swiftly with the help of the pre-processed and pre-selected data, and definitely different formats must be supported, and information extraction capability and feature should be there. And I'll just give some samples of the user interface. This is how the term search window looks with the syntactic connection of the elements. This is how the results look like. Oh. And these documents in the search results may be extended with the thematically similar documents. They are marked as similar documents. This is how the result looks, which is the form representation. Documents similar to the first one have been found.
Так выглядит автоматически генерируемые ключевые.
That's how automatically generated words and keywords look like for documents number 2, and it allows the expert to understand how the document corresponds to the topic, so you can increase the number of keywords which the expert might use through manual search if he doesn't want to use the explorative word on the thematic. That's how some application scenarios abstracts generated based on the keywords and keyword combinations. As I've said, one of the key elements of the system is the support of user selections. Here we mean that the expert can choose the necessary documents and then to analyze these documents. That's how the interface on the user's selections look like. The documents are added through different search engine results, can be selected into particular selection, and then you can work with these particular selections. In what way? To check whether the documents on this topic have been selected based on the keywords and keyword combinations. It is possible to cluster and to use this defined cluster in a new selection. For example, in belt of voltage documents, there are 26 of them dedicated to the creation of these documents, and 5 documents regard the application of these elements in medical sector. Therefore, it is possible to choose the necessary ones when you have the question which particular technologies is necessary to use in this area. In conclusion, I'd like to demonstrate visualization results of the aggregate analysis of metadata. Metadata are as important as the full text. In this slide, you can see the distribution of documents based on years. It's possible to define the authors. You have this, the last names of the authors in short. So you can have other type of analytics on the patent owners. On the collections, you have the patents and the articles in foreign publications, and on the countries of owners, and on the class of international patent classification. In conclusion, I'd like to mention that our instrument is being actively developed. We call it I4 Plans. It contains a wider tools of visualization, which is going to be talked about by colleagues of mine. There is a number of new things for the Ministry of Education, Higher Education and Science by the Institute of Zhukovsky, and we are developing actively to have the product for these services, either in the form of software or in the product mode, be accessible to a big number of stakeholders. Thank you very much for your attention. This is all for my presentation.
Thank you very much. Please ask your questions in chat if you have any. So our next presenter is Ivan Zugasti from the Millennium Project Spain. Ivan, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Alexander.
Илья, уберите презентацию.
Share my Can you see it?
Yes, please.
To the whole team for this new invitation to the Millennium Project to take part in this great conference. And today I will be presenting this research we are launching now, and my colleague José Luis Cordeiro will be speaking tomorrow on our COVID-19 scenarios. So it's a great pleasure to be here again. And my turn today is to speak about the transition from artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence, and how we can manage this transition in this new time of the COVID-19 new scenarios. So, starting from the research point of view on something that I was talking about last year in the High School of Economics conference, on the next technologies, on those technologies that are really making a change in our society today. Of course, we've been researching a lot on the impact of artificial intelligence on our long-term scenarios, but also we are talking about robotics, synthetic biology and genomics, computational science, cloud and big data analytics, artificial and augmented reality, nanotechnology, Internet of Things, tele-everything, tele-everybody, quantum computing, telepresence, intelligence, augmentation, collective intelligence, blockchain, 3D, 4D printing, drones, driverless cars, conscious technologies, and of course, the synergies among all of them, which is the real big change that we are going to see. When we are talking about artificial intelligence, it is quite important to make a difference in between the different levels of artificial intelligence and technology. So what where we are right now is in what the experts on artificial intelligence called the artificial narrow intelligence. So it is the level where we, the humans, still give the orders to the robots, to the machine, and we are having the lead in that technology. So compared to what we call artificial general intelligence, we are not still in that phase, and so the experts define the artificial general intelligence as that intelligence where the technology can already read and write its code and develop their own decision making. And we can still think about the third stage where we are talking about what it is called the artificial superintelligence, where we will reach the time of what they call the singularity, where artificial intelligence will be equivalent to human intelligence. And therefore, machines and robots will be able to make their own decisions and will be able to act as humans. The important point and the important issue is that nowadays we still cannot say, and even the best experts in artificial intelligence, they cannot decide when this will happen. So there is a lot of uncertainty on this. We know this could happen. This is a possible scenario. And so this should be taken into account in our decision making today, but we still don't know when and how this is going to happen. So it is very relevant that we start research today on this potential technology development, especially what relates to artificial intelligence. So what is possible will probably change. Why? Because we have Moore's law and Nielsen's law, where we know that the rate on which our capacity and the capacity of technology to manage data and to take decisions on this big data approach is increasing, not in a linear way, but in an exponential way. Uh, we know that artificial intelligence acceleration could take us to artificial general intelligence and thus change totally the landscape or strategic landscape in terms of what refers to technology. And together with that, we are seeing a huge change in computational science, together with the synergies among all those new technologies we were talking about related to blockchain, to 3D, 4D printing, and so on. So altogether, these four will change what we think is possible today, and we need to integrate that into our current scenario planning. Because we are aware that, as President Putin said a few years ago, whoever leads artificial intelligence rules could rule the world. And this is the starting point. China goal, we know, is to lead the world in artificial intelligence by 2030. So there are many global projects ongoing, like the Human Brain projects led by US, EU, China, Russia. So the big powers are already betting on this. There are many corporate projects all together by IBM, Google, Facebook, the big tech corps. So there is a race on the great brain, and whoever leads this race will be leading the world somehow. So these technologies could bring us many opportunities and benefits, but we are aware that these technologies could also bring some important challenges, especially if we take into account potential dangerous combination like this one, where we are taking together organized crime, making democracy and free markets an illusion potentially. So we really need to take care of this triangle where organized crime together with terrorism and corruption could and including information warfare could be could mean a big threat for the whole humanity. Also, there are some other technologies that are accelerating this change, especially in what concerns mobile communications, the famous 5G, or soon we will start talking about 6G. But we also need to be concerned about their impacts on health and on our lives, because many studies are not including their impacts on what refers to frequency, amplitude, duration, distance, or dosimetry. So there are many good opportunities from these technologies, but also a lot of potential threats. So why we are planning to start this global research on this transition on artificial intelligence? Because it is argued that creating rules for governance of artificial intelligence too soon will stifle its development. So if we start too soon, we may affect negatively the development of this technology. On the other hand, some artificial general intelligence experts believe it is possible to have artificial general intelligence as soon as 10 years. So we might be closer than we think actually. Since it is likely to take 10 or more years to develop artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence international agreements, design an international governance systems, and begin implementation, we think that then it is wise to begin exploring governance approaches now. So this is why we are planning, and we were actually planning to launch this this research study in 2020. It is also true that due to the pandemic, we had to postpone this research because we've been working very hard this year on developing those COVID-19 scenarios that my colleague Jose Cordeiro will present tomorrow. But it is now where we are really planning to start this global research because we think this is really going to be the next big wave after the COVID crisis is under control. So there are some initial explorations on this issue, as you all know. There are many high-level think tanks and top universities already working on this. Oxford, the United Arab Emirates Ministry of State for Artificial Intelligence, UN agencies, the Future of Life Institute. I mean, there are many private and public institutions that are currently researching on this issue. There are some potential governance models that we've been researching on already, so we don't need to reinvent the wheel. So we already can look at different models that are running right now, and that could be adapted to this case of artificial intelligence, like for instance the International Atomic Energy Agency-like model, or the World Trade Organization-like enforcement powers. For climate change, the IPCC-like model also. Also, International Science and Technology Organization as an online real-time global collective intelligence system, or the governance by information power, global governance coordinating committees. So we see that there are many different alternatives that could be followed for this case of artificial intelligence. Even the ISO quality management standards that are internationally quite well accepted, and of course put different parts of artificial general intelligence governance under different bodies, like those UN agencies that could really manage this transition from artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence. So our proposed global governance study is trying to follow the following steps. Assess current studies of governance issues, questions, concepts, and models. Conduct a real-time Delphi study on questions not asked or poorly answered. So we think there is a lot of research ongoing, but there are still many questions that have not been answered. Draft detailed alternative governance scenarios based on real-time Delphi results. Review of the feasibility, viability, and effectiveness of the artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence governance models in each scenario by the real-time Delphi panel. And of course, produce a report on each step, concluding with recommendations for international governance of the transition from artificial narrow intelligence to artificial general intelligence, to stimulate global discussion and debate on that. So here I would like to take the opportunity to invite all those agencies, research centers, and universities, governments who are interested to contact us and let us know if you are really interested in taking part in this global research study that we are planning to launch soon. And at the same time, invite you to of course, to bring your local and national views to this study and share the results of this research with all of you who are interested in taking part. We think this is really relevant for the future of humanity. And of course, we are totally open to cooperation on this. And finally, just let me give you a few words on the Millennium Project for those that don't know this Global Futures Network. We are a global network created in 1996 after a feasibility study by the people who were working in the UN university, and that started this movement to promote future studies and global futures research in a global base. So it's made of UN organizations, governments, NGOs, corporations, and universities. We are trying to get together all the relevant stakeholders related to the 15 global challenges. It acts already like a trans institution. We have more than 63 nodes in the world, and we are trying to connect the local views with the global views on those global challenges. And of course, we have developed this global futures intelligence system that I'm also inviting all of you to explore and to come to, because this is where we gather all our knowledge and books and reports and information that we have been developing in the last more than 20 years. So this is the end. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'm looking forward to listening to your questions. Thank you very much, Alexander.
Okay, thank you very much, Ivan. It was very interesting presentation. Okay, our next presentation will be made by Elena Khabirova from ISSEK HSE. Elena, the floor is yours. Please go ahead.
Добрый день, коллеги. Приветствую всех, кто присоединился к нашей
Good afternoon, dear colleagues. I'd like to welcome you to our conference. Can you see the slides? Yeah, perfect. Everything is good. Together with Ilya Sachenkov, represent the ISSEK and HSE responsible for big data analysis. My report is dedicated to the promising custom functions and new analytical products in text mining and intellectual analysis of big data. I'd like to mention that in my presentation, I'm not going to touch upon general theoretical or very technical details. I'm going to elaborate on the ideas and methodological approaches that we have been using and developing in our applied projects using text mining. First of all, I try to summarize the major goal of our project, a new approach to solving usual challenges in STI analysis. And I'm going to briefly overview the existing text mining products. And then I'm going to elaborate on the development of new custom functions in analytical products, iFora, which we are developing and use in project implementation. And then I'm going to talk about new experiences based on big data. Talking about the challenges, this is the relevance of analytics based on big data. This is the faster technological development in a very dynamically changing agenda and physical restrictions on data processing by human, sometimes a biased approach from different experts. Along with that, we see higher demand for different global frontier quality expertise as opposed to spot experts. So we see that there is a demand for online response system. So that might be a new model of strategic analytics based on big text data processing. So much information, much data is becoming accessible in the transparency of new data sources. So the actively developing new models of data processing, natural language processing, allows us to get better results in so-called NLP solutions. How does it look like in practice? Over a couple of decades, we've been seeing creating so-called box solutions in big text mine analytics. The market is still developing at a very impressive space. Along with a number of startups and IT giants are developing these software products, allowing different users, experts, corporate analysts, officials to process different arrays of data, and at the end, as a result, to get analytical visualization of the results, which allow them to answer such questions as what my clients writing about in network, what the most popular questions in call centers, how to structurize our corporate base of knowledge, what are the court precedents related to this particular issue. So the field of implementation of these NLP instruments is very wide. Some are of universal natures, others are of specific nature. For example, Statistical, Australian company, which you can see on this slide through the intellectual analysis of the text, allows to see the convergences in order to investigate crimes. You can see the typical example of interface of the system. On the left-hand side, you can see the machine coding of sense components of the text. People, organizations, interactions, dates, places. On the right-hand side, you can see the graph of connection between people, events, companies. That might be very convenient both for the broader picture of what is going on, as in the course of detailed hypothesis investigation of the reasons for a particular case based on this data. In the ISSEK HSE, we've developed our own analytic system titled IFORA. Currently, its database has more than 400 millions of documents in English, in Russian, and Chinese. These are articles, patents, grant conference, analytical reports, law, vacancies, and a big segment of daily cited market analytics and professional mass media in different areas, which allows to conduct analysis in any area, adding up your own documents. IFORA system foundation is based on text mining approaches with the use of computer linguistics, the technology of processing big data, thanks to computational capacity of supercomputer in data cluster. The major principle of IFORA system is in its model approach, when in order to solve different applied tasks, we adjust different function segments. The major user functions as of today can be seen on this slide. It's a wide range of solutions have shaped over many years work with different clients of ours, with the participation of different businesses, state research centers who are interested in automation of analytics and in decision-making support. In blue color, you can see the most required. Among them, we can name trend, identification, life cycles, the assessment of penetration of these technologies, the qualitative and quantitative market assessment, startups analysis, benchmarking, aggregation of forecasts, the comparison of agendas. Along with that, on the screen, you can see some analytical products offered by IFORA, which are used for visualization of text data. This range is developing on a daily basis. I'd like to elaborate on some of the formats. I'm going to move in a row. The quantitative market assessments allows us to get the situation, the current situation based on data collected according to different rules from open sources. The second one is semantic map, which reflects the content of topics connected with a particular area, their interaction, context interaction, allow us to see the essence of a particular scientific area. Number three is a life cycle map, which detects and tracks radically new S&T innovations, economic and social phenomena, as it reflects the dynamics of a particular area based on different types of quality and patents, market analytics. And one of the sources or other sources can detect the particular stage of the life cycle.
Поисковые исследования, разработки или уже коммерциализация.
It's about development and commercialization. Other formats include the structural change diagrams, trends grouped by pace, maps of competence careers, reputation analysis, and startup profiles, as well as effect matrices. So we can move towards how the new analytical products are developed based on the big data in iFora. First, we'll look at information gaps, detect them. Later on, we shape indicators library based on big data. Then we systematize our available data sources. We move towards the design of problem-oriented analytic maps for different groups of users. At the bottom of the screen, you can see our pipeline for products based on big data in the iFora system. And I encircled a couple of things I want to dwell at. So now you can see the promising tool that is an analytical product which is meant for prediction of technology convergence, whether different trends and technologies may converge into something new. And the axis year parameters are calculated for all these technologies and trends based on the patterns identified and the similar dynamics analysis. We project the convergence, possible convergence. It is now in the pilot or testing stage, and we're tweaking the main parameters, and we probably will come up with it later, unveil it later. Then I want to tell you that previous trends or professions or competences may be transformed as a response to new trends. And you can see different trends and their representation in different information sources. First, we determine of the time interval after which the corresponding topics will begin to be mentioned, vacancies in the labor markets, and we identify patterns of topic transitions. And the final one is the interpolation of the revealed patterns, taking into account the general structure, current trends, and structural changes to monitor future trends in professions and competence. And as a summary, our next steps, we will be experimenting with proposed metrics based on big data, validating results by retrospective forecasting. Just will validate them upon the already past developments. we will definitely build new, richer data visualization, and we'll provide further in-depth study of new analytic formats based on the text data for the decision makers, and we'll definitely develop new user interface so that we could come up with something brand new and novel. I hope we will be able to tell you about our further advancements and achievements during new conferences later.
Thank you very much for your presentation. And we have the last presentation for today. It will be made by Alana Markle and Dexter Doherty from OECD. I must say that OECD has a very good record in future studies, and the most influential body within OECD is government foresight community, which gathers every year or half a year, and they discuss the most important issues for future studies. And I hope we'll have a chance to have very interesting presentations. So, Dexter, the floor is yours. You will be making presentation. Yes.
We'll be sharing the presentation, so
Okay,
I'll do the opening and then turn it over. Thank you very much for the shout out to the Government Foresight Community meeting. It was great to have you, and thank you for the invitation here today. So my name is Alana Markle, and I'm here with my colleague Dexter Doherty, and we're going to be talking about one of 3 scenarios that we're developing as part of an internal scenarios exercise we're running for the OECD. And we'll be discussing today, particularly the socioeconomic and political implications that we're seeing from that scenario, which focuses on the idea of the metaverse. So for those who aren't familiar, the OECD is an international organization, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development. We have 38 member governments, and the slogan is Better Policies for Better Lives. So we sort of specialize in expert policy analysis and themes like inclusive development and sustainable growth. Within the OECD, the Strategic Foresight Unit sits within the Secretary General's office. So we do analysis across the OECD, working with partners and other directorates, both on projects that are focused internally and externally with governments, either member or non-member governments. And we also host global dialogues like the Government Foresight Community that was referenced minutes ago. So this is basically what our work used to look like, and now it looks like today. Of course, like all of you, we have very much transitioning into more digital mode. But what we've actually found is that the kind of foresight interventions we run, which tend to be based on dialogue methodologies, very participatory, very much based on convening people around an idea or a process, it actually tends to lend itself quite well. So we've been actually quite happy to be able to experiment with this new normal in our team. I know you are all familiar with what foresight is, but just from our perspective, we considered an approach to thinking systematically about the future with really an eye to inform decision making. And we don't do forecasting or predictive analytics. We work with alternative plausible futures, largely using qualitative methodologies. Why foresight? OECD prioritizes foresight as a way of helping member governments and its own directorates future-proof policies and strategies that are either being developed or implemented as a kind of creative space to identify new opportunities and challenges and to spur innovative thinking about solutions maybe to known problems, but that otherwise we may not have been considering. And this is a thing that we're of course revising our idea of what foresight is and why it's useful in the light of the current pandemic and this context of really deep kind of disruption and uncertainty. And we're finding that there's a real opening and increased interest in foresight within governments and organizations, including businesses around the world. and they're really starting to see it now as an important input to doing responsible policy making. So we're really advocating the idea that foresight's, it's a due diligence process. It's not a luxury for governments to use. And it's really critical to building organizational resilience, to be doing things like engaging proactively with ideas about the future, imagining and preparing for the unexpected, and designing adaptive forward-looking strategies to issues like the colleague from the Millennium Project around AI that are just still on the horizon. So transitioning specifically to the work we're going to be talking about today, the OECD is in the process of electing a new Secretary General to start in 2021. And as part of that process, we've been asked to develop a set of scenarios to help the organization think about its own internal priorities and strategies. So we are developing a set of scenarios that will inform the long-term strategic orientations of the organization. So the approach we've taken is to surface challenges and assumptions about the future, specifically of the international system, that we think could be relevant to the OECD going forward. So I'm going to turn it over now to my colleague Dexter, who's going to be presenting one of those scenarios and the relevance for the OECD.
All right, well, thanks so much, Alana. So in our research, we've surfaced and been looking at about, a number of critical uncertainties and change drivers for the future. But for the scenario we're talking about today, there's 4 big ones that we're looking at and paying attention to. First one is around digital sovereignty and interconnectedness. How connected the internet is, whether or not it is divided into different internets. There's a whole lot going on, obviously, in technological transformation. This is, what tech is invented, what new innovations will come out. We've taken a particular interest in VR and virtual reality that will come up through our presentation today. That is not to say it's the only one that we're paying attention to. The expanding power of non-state actors is another big one. I think we've seen how a lot of big tech companies, multinational tech companies, have accumulated a lot more wealth and power in the pandemic, but also over the last couple of years. But we're also paying attention to social movements as well. And then the last major sort of uncertainty here is access to and control of the critical raw materials and vital resources that are essential to a digital economy, an ever more digital economy. Now, moving away from those fairly high level things, we're looking at, there's a number of sort of specific developments that are tied into the scenario that we're building up today. One is around COVID and telepresence and telework. I mean, like we're joining this conference virtually. Everything from schools around the world to work has been disrupted in some capacity. A lot more things have moved into digital capacities, and that we think that'll have long-term implications. And we intend to be tracking those things. There are a lot of decisions between Europe and the United States around the privacy shield, the privacy regulations when it comes to online behavior and online regulation. There's a big court case that is going to the US Supreme Court that is Oracle versus Google, which is very interesting because Oracle is claiming billions of dollars because Google borrowed code a long time ago to help build the Android operating system. And there's a major case here about how much code is copyrightable and at what stage the internet can continue to build on previous versions. Next, we have 5G and Huawei. There's obviously a lot of discussion going around about who will be in control of building digital infrastructure going forward, and the decisions about how that are going to have some pretty wide-ranging implications. Related to this, there were some pretty high-profile fights over TikTok and WeChat, which were there were bans attempted in both India and the United States of these Chinese companies. But also, what's really interesting here is the buyout of TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, partially has Oracle, a major American company, taking over a large bit of control of the company. And again, so similar to this linked American and Chinese company thing, we're paying a lot of attention to video games. And in particular, there's some interesting stuff going on with the video game Fortnite, There were concerts of tens of millions of people taking place within Fortnite. There's been some interesting stuff with people attending things like church in virtual reality. But the big thing here is, so Fortnite's parent company, Epic Games, 40% of it is owned by the Chinese company Tencent. And then lastly, we wanted to be looking and paying attention to the console wars going on and who is building the world of video games. And this is a fight between Sony and Microsoft, but Microsoft very recently purchased one of the biggest video game companies, Bethesda. But they've promised not to make the games exclusive. So there's some interesting things about how they see value in providing wider access to products. And so a lot of what we're working on with these things is we want to challenge an expected future that we see emerging. And there's this assumption that the internet is going to be a more divided place, that it will split, it'll become a splinter net with different national firewalls and digital borders, and everybody's experience of the internet is largely going to be curated and dominated by large domestic firms. And so we wanted to use this scenario in particular to ask, what if that was wrong? And the thing that we're looking at here is, what if this, a thing we're seeing signals of, major consumer demand, and the profitability of interoperability leads us down a different path for the internet. And so that's what gets us to the metaverse. It's a term that links back to a science fiction novel called Snow Crash. But the idea here is that we're talking about an interconnected virtual platform, which in our scenario is built by a consortium of tech giants that get together. And if this is, in our scenario of 2035, this is where the majority of all human interaction, both for business and leisure, takes place. So in this scenario, the bulk of people's everyday life takes place basically within one room. Your day begins when you wake up, maybe you go to the bathroom, but your day really starts when you turn on your virtual reality headset and are transported into the metaverse. Users can choose from an ever-growing number of hyper-realistic worlds to visit. The VR equipment is able to stimulate the senses so that everything looks, sounds, and feels real. Nearly all of human needs, except for food, are satisfied in ways that are equivalent and in some ways superior to what you can get in the physical world. And the technology you're using monitors a wide range of bodily and biometric levels so that it can nudge users towards activities that will improve their mood and state of well-being. So in constructing the story and the scenario here, we're thinking about how, to use a sports analogy, tech companies have built a shared playing field on which they can compete. So the companies in the metaverse are competing to provide the latest hardware and software and experiences for customers. And in the scenario we built, states went along with this grand bargain, partially because they were under the same pressure from citizens to provide an interoperable and interconnected internet, but also because they saw an opportunity to control and regulate the behavior of their citizens online and determine what access citizens can get. And on top of that, leverage large populations in the case of bigger, more powerful states to shape how the technology evolves. And what this scenario involves is really complex relationships and fast-moving relationships between states, platform companies, and users both as creators and people experiencing the metaverse. And what this raises is a whole range of new policy issues relating to citizen participation in virtual worlds, things like freedom of expression, protection from fraud and manipulation and harassment, but also the standards and uses for data collection and large-scale surveillance. Some of the big and interesting implications of what we're talking about in this metaverse scenario are for the future of work. So we see in this scenario work being almost entirely creative. So people work in teams, small businesses or large companies, building spaces for various forms of connection. So those are things like virtual pubs and virtual art exhibits to fully fledged virtual Disneylands, massive worlds that people can go explore. And on the same time, we see the future of work within some of these large companies. They will have virtual campuses where you have spaces where employees can connect together to stimulate creativity and create new things. And In terms of state power and international relations, I hinted at it before, but in terms of who can access which of the virtual worlds within the virtual universe is going to be a process of negotiation. Some states will mandate that what can be created by their citizens, what rule or what spaces are going to be able to, their citizens can gain access to. But at the same time, there's some really interesting things for international relations in a world that is predominantly virtual. So I'm Canadian. There's a lot of relationships between Canada and the United States that are largely tied to geography. There are other values and things that are shared, but when it comes to international relations, if you were to remove a whole lot of the influence geography has on state-to-state relations, there could be some very interesting things that come with that. We're also really interested in some of the ideas of cybersecurity that would come from a world that would be this shared, when vulnerabilities in one place could spill over into other places. And we're also interested in, there's some really fun discussions that are coming out of what this would mean for the future of self-expression. If people are communicating through avatars with people around the world, what would this mean for how people present themselves, how cultures are formed, how gender is expressed, how people make sense of their identity, and maybe most significantly, how people form relationships with one another. And we see a lot of cascading issues from this in terms of issues such as marriage rights and migration. If people form, romantic relationships with someone on the other side of the world and they want the right to be united, that could cause issues for how we do a whole lot of policy work. Now, this moves us into a space where we have questions around what this means for the future of the OECD, because this is the purpose of these scenarios. And the thing that we're sort of asking is, like, how does the OECD position itself to serve the global community and fulfill in the increasingly important task of establishing a framework for the rules of the metaverse? But I mean, on a more basic level, it also raises questions about what the value and purpose and the value added of the OECD is when you can't convene, you don't convene people at a fancy chateau in Paris. And then there's also these other questions for the OECD around what sorts of relationships should be formed with platform companies. What is the appropriate voice that large companies should have around the decision-making table as we move into more and more digital futures? And so, I mean, to wrap this up, the metaverse scenario allows us to ask a whole lot of really complex questions and move into some complex discussions, and forces us to think through the implications of technological innovation. We're seeing some rapidly changing understanding of what best practices and approaches and standards are. And this is to foster discussion about those things within a place like the OECD that wants to be a place that is determining what best practices and appropriate standards are. And one of the other important things here is to think about the interesting digital divides and inequalities that this could bring, both within countries, when countries would have to decide what level of connection to the metaverse they would provide for citizens, or whether that would be purely market driven, and also between countries, as there are some countries that aren't currently wealthy, but if they were to have the right investment in digital infrastructure, could mobilize, could leapfrog ahead, dodging stages of infrastructure development and mobilizing a young population in a new world. And simultaneously, there are currently wealthy populations that countries with populations that are aging that might run into difficulty trying to manage a scenario like this that involves large scale technological transformation and social transformation. And lastly, there are some of these questions around, what can an organization like the OECD provide and other international organizations in terms of technical support and cybersecurity for advice and support for smaller states that might not be able to do this. Yeah, that is our presentation. So thank you so much. We'd be happy to field some questions afterwards.
Okay, thank you very much, Alan and Dexter. I guess now we have some room for questions and answers. Maybe you can answer the questions you will see in chats already now. Okay. So the first question was to Ilya.
Да, коллеги, я переведу на русский язык. Вопрос от Максима Кацемира.
Translated into Russian. Question from Maxim Casimir, whether I4 tools, analytical tools, support visualizing co-authorship links by countries, organizations, and separate authors, and co-quotes also. The answer is affirmative. There is a reservation, however, caveat. Yes, with a library and limited frames, and Scopus and Web of Science also allow for that. These are structural data that can be visualized in this respect. If we talk about the full text analysis, if we add like PhD thesis, we should also apply extraction tools, and we did that, manipulation tools. But you know, authorship ambiguity issue crops up when we work with patents and different types of sources and publications and presentations and patents. So author disambiguation issue comes up, and you know, you should have a lot of capability to resolve that, and you need analysts to verify. But anyway, the answer would be by and large affirmative. But I have not seen, I never saw some examples of co-authorship maps, like in the field of AI, for example, on any other topic. So I don't think I4 has this toolkit. You know, it is quite promising visualizing tool. We never had demand for that in the past. But you know, now the number of queries is on the rise. And probably we will be able to have it, now it's in the pipeline, we'll be able to have it shortly.
Our next speaker is Ivan. Could you please answer the question? It was actually my question about how foresight will be changed. Will be changed when super artificial intelligence is in place. What do you think about this?
Yes, thank you, Alexander. As we were discussing in the chat, I think it's a major issue for us, for futurists, as long as many of our research and analysis processes could be automatized, as it happens with lawyers or with other high skills work and research activities. So there will be some impacts of artificial intelligence especially in this transition into general intelligence in our futurist work. Some of the analysis, the trend analysis could be clearly automatized, and also looking at the scenario developments, we will see that some parts of those analysis could also be replaced by technologies. A different story is how we use artificial intelligence to replace what we call collective intelligence. So not the intelligence by only one human, but of a bunch of a group of humans, because I mean, in many, as you know, many foresight methods like Delphi or futures workshops or structural analysis, we are using collective intelligence. We are not talking about individual intelligence. But there is also, it could happen that artificial general intelligence could also replace that collective intelligence. So we, the futurists ourselves, need to be aware of this transition.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, and now questions for Елена. Елена, are you ready to answer?
Yes, of course.
Please.
По поводу того, могла ли Айфора
It was
предсказать
about whether IFORA was able to predict COVID-19 or the resurgence of the second wave thereof, and the political measures that would be, whether will be come into play in the vaccines design and development. I would answer as follows, starting with our agricultural and agribusiness projects that we started 2 years or 5 years ago. Well, 2 years ago, we believe we saw weak signals about some aggravation of epidemiological situation in future and the appearance, the advent of new diseases. And had we traced those signals based on big data? Well, if we trace them properly, we may come up with assumptions and hypotheses with respect to forecasts of whether there will be a second wave or not. Well, those anticipatory and projection tools have some underlying models. And our models, I think, are more elaborate in some respects, but in epidemiological or social developments, we're less sophisticated. So definitely there is lots of room for advancement in this respect.
Okay, thank you very much. We have many questions to last presentation. So Alon and Dexter, could you please answer?
Yeah, of course. So there's two questions here. One is about astroturf movements. This would, as we, if we had an hour to sort of tease out everything in this scenario, this idea of misinformation and manipulation is a pretty significant factor for us. It'd be one of the really interesting implications of this in a situation when you have a ton of interaction between different people in different cultures without respect for distance and geographical boundaries. You could have some really interesting ways that misinformation and manipulation can take place, and there could be some complex ways that international relations would have to be handled. That would be the kind of thing that you would think you would want some international collaboration, cooperation over. This is where you would need some kind of management for the issues that balance out between various countries. I hope that's a sufficient answer, because I'm gonna jump to the second question here, is about the inequalities in providing access. At the current stage of development, what we intend to do with these is, these are going to be presented to some fairly high level, not only workers within the OECD, but the member countries as well. The purpose of this is to raise some of these questions about, how do you provide stable, equal access to these kinds of things? One of the things that this scenario could absolutely bring is a massive scaling up in global inequality and digital divides. The current level of digital divide isn't, by worst case scenario, that difference could be opened up. And so as an OECD mandate, when we look at inequality pretty consistently, and as one of our core areas of focus, we want to be raising these questions about the ways technological transformation and this move towards more virtual could exacerbate some of these issues. And I wanted to clarify one sort of final thing with the nature of these scenarios is, as much as this is driven by virtual entertainment and virtual reality, the questions we're raising in this scenario about what happens when people connect over greater distances, what happens as we move to a world that's more driven by technology, none of those are dependent upon big changes in the video game space or necessarily virtual reality being taken on to this extreme. So yeah, there's a lot of ways, but these questions are good. These are the questions we intend to raise here and push some of the people that we report to be thinking about, because they're also becoming very quickly relevant in the present.
Okay, thank you very much. If anybody has more questions or maybe something to say, now please, you're invited. if nobody wants to say anything, I would like just to mention in the end that it was a very interesting session, I guess. So we discussed the problem of artificial intelligence, and it's important to see both dangers and opportunities from artificial intelligence. And so it's one of the key issues for many states, many countries. I know how big attention is paid to artificial intelligence in China now, for example, or in the United States, or in Russia, by the way. And we have a lot of opportunities, and we are expecting more and more opportunities related to AI. But dangers are also important. So for Foresight exercises in this respect are very important, I guess, on the one hand. On the other hand, artificial intelligence and so we saw in two presentations from our institute that it gives us rather powerful instruments to explore new opportunities and to help people dealing with future studies to identify key events, key issues to be addressed while analyzing artificial intelligence and building scenarios and estimating future events in this respect. I guess again, let me say that it was very interesting for myself, and I hope you will find more interesting presentations during this week. So I invite you to our next sessions. The next one will start at 3 o'clock. Oh, sorry. The next one will start tomorrow at 3 o'clock by Moscow time. It will be devoted to foresight, future trends, and disruptions. So thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you for our speakers. Thanks for those who asked questions, and I hope to see you tomorrow at our conference. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexander.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.